So I'm down here in my armory doing the video for the Q&A live stream announcement. And I figure I might as well get what I want to talk about here kind of off my chest, because I feel like it's something that needs to be talked about and isn't ever. And it's somewhat divisive, although it really shouldn't be. And at the end of the day, I don't really have the thoughts fully formed. So this is going to be a very informal random ramblings video. Usually I have a very decent outline of exactly what I want to say, all the things I like detail out, and I know I'm going to say, and it's very easy for me to get up and say it without doing a lot of ums and stopping and thinking and cutting the camera and all that, so I can get it out as one good solid thought. But I don't know that I can do that this time, so I'll have to just do my best. But this is very informal, and I don't really have a lot of notes. But I do have a couple that I have kind of posted right under my camera, so I can just kind of glance down at them. And they're there really as more of a reference for me for specific terminology, which I'll get to in a moment. But for the most part, this is not a fully formed thought. And it comes up because of a lot of questions I get asked. This is not really the questions I get asked that I did a video on or that the live stream will cover. But it's something that comes my way every once in a while, where someone asks me like the historical, factual validity of something. And we've seen this fairly recently online with a really terrible BBC documentary that just got a lot of things wrong, or at least partially wrong. And what happens is, when something like that does happen, the people who criticize it take it to the other extreme. So somebody will say, well, this is factually true, and then the immediate response is, no, this is completely false. And I don't think either person is actually right, because when it comes to history, there's a large gray area. And I think it's human nature. We as humans like to go to extremes. We like to very firmly plant our feet in one opinion or the other. Whether or not it even has facts to back it up, we like to do that. It's a very defensive method. We just do it. It's human nature. And when it comes to history, and boy, it's raining out there, it's storming out there. It's one of the reasons I've been doing very few other videos this weekend. But when you look at the way people approach this, it doesn't consider the gray areas. I don't think that's how history really works. History is not made purely of fact or fiction. It's never quite that simple. And I think historians are very aware of this. Even really good armchair historians are pretty good at recognizing this. If you've ever listened to Dan Carlin, the guy who does the Hardcore History podcast, which if you haven't, I don't know why you're watching my videos. You need to go listen to his podcast. He is absolutely amazing, and I would wholeheartedly recommend him as a great entertaining source of history. But he talks about this a lot, not really directly like I'm doing, but he talks about it a lot in terms of, well, this is what they think happened in history, and here's why they think it. And when it comes to the way historians work this out, they have something called the historical method. You can go Google search it, and it describes the method by which, just like the scientific method exists, it's the method by which historians kind of vet out whether or not a thing in history actually happened or not, or at least what the likelihood of it is. And they're really good at that. Historians are really good at that. And when they write their narratives, they're writing their narratives that are based on that concept of, well, this is probably what happened. And they have all sorts of sources, whether it's archaeological sources or written sources and accounts, and they have ways of gauging how much weight you give to those evidences. And I'm going to simplify this down from my own thoughts, and because we as humans love alliteration, and alliteration really works for me, I'm going to call it the 6 P's of historical validity. That's a very unofficial title that's going to pop up right there. But these 6 P's are really just to kind of give you that range between the black of complete falsehood and the white of complete truth. And there's all these gray areas in between. So kind of starting down at the bottom, you essentially have preposterous, things that will never have happened. You have problematic, things that maybe they could have, but there's a lot of evidence to the counter. You have what's possible. A lot of evidence, but nothing really points to anything one way or the other. Kind of in the middle, kind of. You have plausible, something that probably happened. There's evidence for it being possible and maybe even having happened. You have probable, something that has a high likelihood of being the case. This is what happened. And you have provable, which is actually one of the more rare. in all honesty, and those are the things that we have so much evidence for that there's really no question about it. And historians have this method, right? And just like the scientific method, history changes over time. Just like science has changed. 100 years ago, scientists believed certain things about our universe and our world, and today they believe very different things, and it's based on discoveries over the past century, right? The same thing is true of history, especially when you look at history as written by the Victorian era historians who like to just throw in a lot of their own opinions on things and really gave very, very bad accounts, historical accounts sometimes. We rediscover things in history, and then we can point to it, and we can say, well, this is the new facts that we have to some extent. But I want to go through this list that I just gave of these 6 P's and kind of give you some examples of what comes up when we talk about some of these things. Things that are problematic are really, really straightforward. When something is problematic, it simply means, preposterous, see, informal here. When something's preposterous, it means that's just ridiculous. Aliens having constructed the pyramids. Aliens having helped in the construction of Stonehenge. No. It's completely preposterous. We have, cue the picture of the History Channel aliens guy here, but it's not aliens. People have been ingenious. People have created and done ridiculously complex things in times when we just can't give them credit for it. We don't believe they could have done it, but there's the fact, right? And you see people proving how Stonehenge could have been built by even just a couple of people, not even an army of people was actually necessary. But it's preposterous to say that aliens did it, right? There's zero evidence for that. And not only that, but even a thinking person is going to look at that and say, no. Until aliens come and land on Earth, and then you can say maybe there's some evidence for it, there's zero evidence for it. Things that are problematic are statements that are made that says, this is historical fact, or this is what happened, but the evidence points very strongly to the counter. History, you've heard the thing of history is written by the victors, history is written by the winner. And that's somewhat true, although it's not entirely true. You have plenty of accounts of the people on the losing side. And but when there's only like one account of something having happened, and it's kind of like within human nature, it kind of goes against what human nature would suggest would happen, or we don't really have good evidence for it, or maybe even a lot of evidence to the counter, it's problematic. You can't really say, yeah, this happened. And you can't really take those accounts at face value. If something is possible, like I said, it's kind of the middle ground. When something is possible, it means that it could go one way or the other, and it's completely within the realm of reason that it could have happened. I have a really good example of this, and I have a good example of this one and the next one, plausible, in a conversation I had regarding mail armor. So people have chain mail, whatever you want to call it, and they have hallworks of these things. And they're fighting with them. And then plate armor gets developed over time, and the mail armor kind of goes away, but not entirely, right? It's still there. And there was a discussion between 2 people, and then for whatever reason, they came to me to be a tiebreaker, I guess. I don't know. But they're kind of going back and forth. One person said, no one wore mail under their armor. The other person was like, but they did wear mail under their armor. And for anyone who's ever done a lot of research on the history of armor or anything like that, you'll know that plate armor does have gaps still that need to be protected, and it's done with mail armor, but it's done in a slightly more clever way. They use what's sometimes called like an arming doublet. I've heard arming doublet, arming jerkin, arming gambeson. I think arming doublet is actually the official terminology, or at least the most official that people tend to use. And that is, the gambeson, but basically with mail placed at, key joints and spots where the plate wasn't going to cover. But it wasn't a full shirt of mail. And the question really came up, okay, yeah, we know that exists, but is it possible that someone wore full mail armor underneath their big breastplate? Well, yeah, it's possible. I mean, it certainly could have happened. I think if someone goes and gets a bunch of armor, they'll find that they can put on a whole thing of mail armor and then put on a full plate over it. but it's a lot of unnecessary weight. And that's where it separates between possible and plausible. Because it's completely possible. It could have happened. There's zero evidence really one way or the other that says it didn't happen, right? But it's not plausible because there's a lot of evidence that says it didn't happen. So I kind of got it backwards. There's a lot of evidence that says it probably didn't happen, but there's not a lot of evidence that says that it didn't, right? It's weird. It's hard to wrap my head around like how to get this out there. But at the end of the day, very unlikely that someone actually did that. I can't imagine a situation where someone was like, I'm just going to throw on extra weight for no reason. Very quickly did they realize that all the extra weight was not necessary. You weren't protecting anything any better by putting mail underneath the breastplate. Now, I could be completely wrong about this. I mean, maybe there's evidence out there one way or the other. And again, historical method, I haven't seen it, so I don't view it as plausible. But if someone brings evidence to light, then hey, now I have something I can say is plausible. And plausibility, that plausibility or something being plausible just says the evidence points very strongly to that this could be the case. This is kind of the more factual but not quite leaning statement within history. And then you move on to things like provable and probable. And probable, you can take the example of the arming doublet one step further and say it's actually not just plausible that something happened, so that it could have happened. It's not possible, it's not just plausible, but it's very probable that people never wore full mail under armor, right? And so you can see where the things can kind of fall out in this range. And then finally, provable is just a thing where all accounts, all evidence points to these facts, right? These are kind of the indisputable moments in history. William the Conqueror invading England in 1066. There's a lot of evidence that suggests really, really strongly that happened. I think it is highly unlikely that it did not happen the way the historical records at this point show. Doesn't mean it's not completely within the realm of reason to suggest that, I guess, many, many different eyewitnesses and accounts all conspired to falsify history. But it's so unlikely that happened that, we look at these things and we say this is pretty much the fact. But kind of looping back around to the reason I'm even doing this video, and this isn't a criticism per se, because I think that he's definitely more in the right. When you look at the London Longsword YouTube video that responded to the BBC documentary, there was a moment where my wife and I had a very long conversation about this actually, where the person in the BBC documentary said, we're looking at the I-33 or the 133 manual, and it shows what's essentially like a little monk priest guy and a woman fighting, and the person said, and the woman represents this thing, and the response to that was essentially, why can't the woman just be a woman in the drawing? And I don't disagree with that. In fact, when you look at people who wrote manuscripts and drew in them, very often you would just have drawings in there for the heck of it, right? No other reason they really felt like they should. But I don't think either person's actually completely correct, right? You can't just say, why can't it just be a woman? Just a picture of a woman being drawn in there. And the reason I say it is because usually in manuscripts, when something is the focal point, not just some like random scribbling that some monk put in the sides that have rabbits riding snails and jousting, when it's the focal point, a lot of care is put into those drawings, and they are exactly what they are meant to be, if that makes any sense. It does not mean that woman represents something, but there is some plausibility to that. There is some likelihood. When you look at other manuals that we look at, like in HEMA, you look at something like Fiore, and he has all of his drawings, and they all have, there's a lot of representation, there's a lot of symbolism in the drawings, and you have to look at those and say, okay, we understand what the crown on this person means. It doesn't mean they're a king, and you see the garter on the knee of one of the people in the drawings, and that doesn't mean necessarily they were necessarily subservient, but in their roles, that's kind of what it does mean, right? And you look at the drawings of like the elephant representing fortitude, right? Fortudo, firm stance, that type of thing, and strength. It's an animal. Why can't it just be an elephant? Well, it can just be an elephant, but that's not the point being made. And while, luckily in Fiore, he actually can go on and describe why he's putting an elephant there, you can't just assume that people don't recognize that symbolism, right? This is a problem with history in general. When we look at our world, modern times, and we just recognize things for what they are, right? Woe be unto the archaeologist 10,000 years from now who finds a picture of Mickey Mouse and wonders what the crap that is. And maybe we lose all of our film history, or it's no longer a thing that people really latch onto, hold on to. Maybe a great solar flare wipes it all out, and somebody looks at it and they say, boy, that mouse must represent something. Well, not really, but maybe kind of, right? Anything that's artistic can be like that. It can have representations. When I look at the I-33 manual and I look at what it could represent, it could entirely, within the medieval mindset, that woman could represent some sort of symbol or virtue that they are trying to exposit. It could not. It's really hard to say. But to say one way or the other, I don't think gives credit to the people who are drawing that image, and it doesn't really give credit to the historical method at the end of the day. And again, not really a criticism of London Longsword, because great video, and great videos in general, but it's taking it to the other extreme. This is the reason why I pretty much unilaterally avoid clickbait videos. I've done a few, and I actually find that they get me in more trouble than they do me good, because it's you really want to get the video out and just pay attention to my video, and then it's so easy to get all the facts wrong, or not really think something through, or take a lot of time to sit down and discuss it like I'm doing right now, very informally. And at the end of the day, I don't think there's a lot of value in them from my perspective. Now, there are some of those clickbait videos out there that are wonderful. I love watching them. I'm subscribed to many channels that do those type of videos. But I struggle with them because I don't want to ever find myself guilty of making statements, and I've done it, of making statements that are factually inaccurate. Look at my evolution of armor video, which a lot of people pointed out a lot of the kind of falsehoods in them. And they're falsehoods out of time constraint is the only way I can really think to put it. I'm trying to so overly generalize something that I misrepresent it. Chainmail and where it comes from, mail, whether or not the Romans used it, because they absolutely did use it, the Lorica segmentata, and how and when it was used, and the evolution of that kind of early armor. And it was all very hand-wavy on my part, because I was trying to do a video that was really more focused on kind of the 500 AD to 1500 AD time frame. I just wanted to ignore everything else. And then you get to the end of the video and you talk about how guns came along and it canceled out armor, and it's not really entirely true, but it's close enough, and it's good enough for a 15-minute video, right? So I find myself guilty of that, and so it bothers me, and I don't want to be guilty of that. So here's my challenge to everyone out there, in especially the YouTube realm, but anyone out there who's ever talking about historical anything, especially if you're not a historian. If you're a historian, you might be able to get away with it some, but if you're not a historian, this is very true. Be careful about making absolute statements, because history just doesn't work that way. Think about where something lands in this range of preposterous, problematic, possible, plausible, probable, and provable. And if something sits at provable, then make the statement, yes, this is fact. If something sits in preposterous range, say, no, this is not fact. But if it hits that gray area, say, here's the facts that we know. Or even better, if you don't know, here's one of the best answers to give. I don't know. Because it does history a disservice. It does what happened to people a disservice to say something one way or the other. And I say this is divisive. You see how rambling this really gets when I don't have a true outline. I say it's divisive because I've been wanting to do a video a very long time, and I've never done it because representing it properly in a good way that isn't degrading in some ways is very difficult. And that is kind of the history of women warriors. I've talked about this here and there. I've wanted to do a video on it for a very long time, but I find it very hard to do. And the reason is at the end of the day, my biggest takeaway about talking about women in fighting roles in the Middle Ages, or even the very early Middle Ages, is that it's possible, it's plausible, it's even probable in some cases, and in some cases it's provable. But that whole range of women fighting doesn't necessarily mean that it was the norm. And we are very bad in modern day, everywhere world, of taking our own ideals and our own concepts and trying to unilaterally apply them to the past. We'll say women fought among the ranks of men in the Middle Ages. They fought in battles. Some did, here and there. It was not common. It was really not common. There's a reason it got written down and it said, like, here is Boadicea, or however you say her name, because I can't speak Gaelic, right? But here's a great woman and warrior in history. Or here's Joan d'Arc, right? Joan of Arc. And of course, she never actually fought, per se. But at the end of the day, it's not really within the realm of, like, the day-to-day warfare that we saw in the Middle Ages. Women weren't really out there. It wasn't considered their role. The way my wife puts it is, women were way too smart to go out there and risk their lives and die. They were much more clever. And I'd agree with her. If you look at history, women were much more clever than probably even the people back then gave them credit for. But this comes, people want to support, I want to support the idea that women can do anything, because they can. They can do anything. But that you can't just apply that unilaterally to the past. People didn't think that way in the past. Even in the early Middle Ages, when quite honestly, in the early Middle Ages, women actually had a lot more freedoms, they still weren't viewed the same way. And it does a disservice to the women who lived in that time to tell lies about it at the end of the day. And the video I would do on this would cover so many random topics, not just about women in warfare, just become women in the Middle Ages especially. You look at things like the Paston letters, pieces of history, evidence that suggest how things worked. And you look at it and you go, oh my goodness, when you think about the situations that are being described in this letter, this could be applied to modern times. A father not wanting... a father and mother not wanting their daughter to marry, a person who is not on the same level of nobility as them, and yet she wants to marry for love, so she does, right? And then we have all the armchair historians who come in and say, people never married for love in historical times. That never happened. It was always for political gain. Yeah, not really. Oh, people were forced into marriage in the Middle Ages. Women had no choice who they would marry. Absolutely not true. They would do it because it was the norm, and it was expected of them, and they were trying to fulfill what they viewed as maybe a family duty or a duty to society. But they absolutely had the right. You could not actually force a woman to marry anyone. They still, at the end of the day, had to agree to it, to assent to it, to say "I do," right? As we do in modern marriages. I mean, now, is it possible? Is it even plausible? Yeah, maybe that some noblemen paid off a priest. Corruption existed, and maybe they forced someone into marriage, but it wasn't the norm. And we want to look at the Middle Ages and say it's absolutely medieval the way they treated women. But it wasn't really all that different sometimes than how we treat people, not just women, but people in general today. I don't know. I've rambled on quite a while, haven't I? At the end of the day, this is my struggle with it, right? I just want people to understand history properly. And I want people to reflect it properly. I want people to do it justice and not be lazy. And again, I'll note, I have been lazy in the past, and it's a terrible thing to be that lazy. You shouldn't do it. And so I'm going to try really hard to not be that lazy when from here on out, when I do my videos that are kind of more historical documentary stuff, the Historia series. When I do those type of things, I want it to absolutely be, within the realm of reason, and call out when it is fact or when it's supposition. Yeah, it's a really hard thing to do. I'm really going to ask other people, try to do the same thing, because I think history deserves better sometimes than what we do to it. And to all the historians out there, thank you for your hard work in really doing all the footwork to bring us our understanding of history, because it's not easy. It's not easy doing it when you're just an armchair historian, much less an actual historian. So yeah, there's my long, random, rambling thought on the historical method, on historical likelihood and probabilities, and at the end of the day, I'm sorry if I've ever misrepresented something. I hope you'll forgive me of that, and you'll enjoy my future videos and my current videos. And until the next time I really have a real inkling to just go on rambling for however long this has been now, time code to appear right here. Until next time, have a wonderful day, everyone. Have a good week. And I guess I'll see everyone in my live stream.